Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us. May he guide us and give us strength and right understanding. May love and harmony be with us all. Om Peace, Peace, Peace. And good evening. We're continuing our lecture today on Swami Abhedananda's chapter called The Mystic Word and God Consciousness, which basically focuses around the word Om and some of the aphorisms in the yoga aphorisms of Patanjali that refer to that. So we'll begin, if you're checking with the book, it's page 306 in volume 3 of the complete works. We'll be starting at the top of that page. Okay.
Ready?
Mm-hmm.
The repetition of this Om and meditating on its meaning is the way. After understanding this, you have to repeat the word Om verbally and think of its meaning. The commentators have made it very clear. Now there comes the psychological effect, which is the practical effect of psychology. It is the repetition of the word. By repeating the word and thinking of its meaning, we approach the cosmic mind very easily. But why is the repetition necessary? Because we cannot think of an object without words. Words are necessary to have the thought in our mind. Nay, words are the vehicle of the thoughts or ideas. We cannot think of a table unless we repeat the word table in our mind. We may try to think of a flower, a rose. We think of rose, rose, rose a few times. Then we have a concept. After that, we would be able to hold our mind upon that concept. But in the beginning, we cannot do that. How can we think of the absolute being or the cosmic mind without any medium? The word God does not...
You skip down to the mystical,
does not represent any particular concept, except the idea of goodness, as I have explained. The cosmic mind is not only good, but omniscient and omnipotent. Everything that exists in the universe is in the cosmic mind. How are we going to represent that by any other word? It would be absolutely impossible.
Okay, before we go too far, maybe we should read the footnote. It says that the contention of Vyasa is that the Vedic teachers hold that the relation of a word and its meaning are eternal, inasmuch as one coexists with the other. The yogi who has come to know well the relation between the word and its meaning must constantly repeat it and habituate the mind to the manifestation therein of its meaning. The constant repetition is to be of the pranava, the Om, and the habitual mental manifestation is to be of what it signifies, Ishvara. The mind of the yogi who constantly repeats the pranava and habituates the mind to the constant manifestation of the ideas it carries becomes one-pointed. And so it has been said, quote, let the yoga be practiced through study, and let study be effected through yoga. By yoga and study together, the highest self shines, unquote. The contention of Vachaspati Mishra is that repeated thinking or understanding, bhavana, means making it enter the mind over and over until it becomes the very substance of the mental existence. The mind feels bliss in the one Lord alone, and so it has been said, Lord then becomes gracious to him up to his attaining the faculty of trance or samadhi and its fruit. All right, so that was quite a footnote. All right, so we'll now continue with the text.
Everything that exists in the universe is in the cosmic mind. How are we going to represent that by any other word? It would be absolutely impossible. We may think that in repeating the word, we can get the real concept of the thing or the object, but a mere repetition would not do. We have to hold our mind steady upon the ideal, upon the thought of a mind that includes everything, or that is all in all, embracing all forms of matter and all thoughts and ideas. By repeating the one idea, we create a mental habit, and that habit is necessary. If we have formed that habit, we gain concentration of the mind. Whenever we are in distress or in a disturbed condition of our mind, or whenever anything unpleasant or any misfortune comes and we do not find any comfort anywhere, if we repeat a few times that mystic syllable Om, the whole vibration will be changed and we shall be uplifted. Our mind will be concentrated and we shall come in direct communion with the cosmic being.
Yeah, and this is certainly a simple practice. Whether you repeat just Om or your whole mantra, if you have a mantra given by a teacher, they virtually all start with Om. And of course, the idea is that starting with the Om, you're connecting your mind to the cosmic reality of the oneness, and out of that oneness comes usually a seed word or a bija mantra, which then leads you into the more concrete form of the chosen ideal, or the particular deity or incarnation that happens to be the source of your mantra. And so your mind is filled with that whole chain of thought, going from the infinite absolute existence, going into manifestation, into seed form, and then into a more concrete manifestation. But whether you're just repeating Om or the full mantra, you can do that anytime. You find yourself irritated because you're waiting in line. Good time to start just repeating the mantra a few times or repeating Om a few times. Nice use of the time. You don't have to waste your time. You're using your time. So every time you find yourself being stalled or frustrated because you're not able to do what you want to do right then and you have to wait, just say, oh, guess it's God wants me to, am I humming something? Something is, yes.
Would it make any difference if you just thought it in your mind, or do you have to?
Oh, no, yeah, well, when you're standing in line, you're going to have to just do it in your mentally, yes. In fact, sometimes they say that mentally is even a higher vibration than doing it audibly. But audibly, I think, also has a benefit. It kind of resonates with your whole being, but obviously you can't do that when you're out in public. So you do it silently.
I don't think I do all the Oms right, you know, when you say Om, all the things you're supposed to go through. I need to be in an Om practicing thing, you know.
Yeah.
She needs a microphone.
You know, there's three things, supposedly.
Yes, yeah. Well, it's as he says here, it's really the diphthong O and because A and U become the diphthong O. So Om, it's not, anything close to that is going to get you there. You don't have to worry. You don't have to worry about being too specific. All right. So let's continue.
All the revelations and inspirations will come, and we get the most wonderful results by the repetition of the syllable. Therefore, we have the counting of the rosary, which the Roman Catholics have exploited. These ideas had originated in India long before the Roman Catholics adopted them and traveled through the Buddhist priests or missionaries who went to Palestine 200 years before Christ and introduced all these ideas. And now you do not know the origin of these ideas. Why do we count the rosary and repeat the formula? The idea is already here. The repetition of any sacred letter or mantra is necessary to have a mental habit, and it is an aid to mental concentration. The priests would not explain it to us because many of them do not know the origin of these things. They would give us stones instead of bread because its meaning is secret, and they keep it for themselves. Again, some of them who do know keep it as secret, because they think that it is for themselves and not for the masses. The masses will follow the idea, and therefore they will go on practicing. But here in the yoga psychology, we find that everything should be understood, and everything should be clearly explained first, and then we shall follow intelligently and not through ignorance.
Yeah, and of course, again, any kind of repetitive task that you're doing also lends itself to repeating the mantra. So if you're cutting vegetables or picking strawberries out in the garden or pulling weeds or something of that nature, each time you do that, you can repeat the mantra. Stuffing envelopes or any other kind of repetitive task that you find yourself doing, you can, when you don't have to do a lot of mental work, you're not trying to solve math problems or balance the checkbook or something more complicated like that, or understand something you're reading, then you can use the mantra as a way of connecting your task to your spiritual practice. Okay, let's continue.
Because if we worship God through ignorance, it does not do us any good. And that is not the right way of worship, but is only mere form. That worship which is in spirit and by spirit is wonderful, and it produces wonderful result at once. Every being can do that, as it is not a secret to anyone. Those who are in earnest and are trying to reach the highest by spirit shall achieve success.
Now, of course, there's Holy Mother gave a slightly different opinion. She said that when somebody said, if I just repeat the mantra mechanically, am I going to get any benefit? And she says, well, if someone's pushed into the water, they still get wet, don't they? So it's not the ideal way. Obviously, it's much better to do it with full understanding and concentration and as much devotion as you can muster. But if you can't muster any of that, then doing it mechanically will eventually lead to that. It will cultivate the devotion and so forth. So it can sometimes be the first step. So you don't want to not do it just because you don't quite feel the devotion for it yet and you haven't quite reached that stage. So you do it because it's what you've been told to do for the beginning, and then gradually things will reach a new level for you. All right, so let's see. Where are we here? Oops, sorry.
The Raja Yoga helps us to understand the fundamental principles of all symbols and ceremonies and rituals that are very common to all the religions of the world. There's also a psychological study. The Raja Yoga is the best and the most wonderful psychology of all religions, because when we study this Raja Yoga, we are studying the fundamentals of all the religions of the world, whether they are old or modern. Modern religions cannot produce anything new. They will make a hash of the old ideas. That is what they are doing, just as Christian Science and Theosophy are doing today. They are not producing anything new. But when we study the yoga psychology, we have the fundamental ideas that underlie all religions of the world, all sects, all philosophy, and all systems. However, by repeating the mystic syllable Om, or any other sacred mantra, we create a habit. And then in time of need, this habit will predominate. It may be asked, why should we repeat, and why should we form that habit? Because we read in the Bhagavad Gita, whatever idea is most predominant at the time of death, that determines our future. What we shall be after death, that depends on our thought and ideal. If we think of God, the Supreme Being, the highest spirit, and hold that thought at the time of death and pass away with it, we do not remain earthbound, but we are enlightened. We see the light and we proceed on higher planes of consciousness. We are no longer subject to rebirth. But if we think of mortal or material things, those perishable things will hold us down. It is the thoughts of our minds that determine our actions and existence.
Yeah, so that's why it's important to form habits of keeping spiritual thoughts in your mind as much as possible, because then that will become the predominant habit and the most likely thing that you will think of at the moment of death. And then going back to the earlier idea about modern religions kind of rehashing old ideas, and in some case, or in some sense, that's certainly true. However, sometimes we have to rehash old ideas in a new framework so that they can speak to a more modern audience. And so you could also look at it that way. So things like Christian Science and Theosophy and Science of Mind and so forth, they're repackaging the ideas in ways that become useful to people in that time and place. And so, but it's nice to understand that they are coming from these older, more ancient ideas. And I think it is wonderful that the study of Vedanta, and particularly he's mentioning here Raja Yoga, potentially really does help you understand other faith traditions. You can read them with a much greater understanding and get a lot more out of them than you would if you didn't have that background. And so it really is useful to have that background to when you read things from other traditions. You see the similarities and the truths embedded in them much more easily, and you can kind of weed out. You know that some things are going to be sectarian views and views that are for particular people at a particular time and place, and so those kinds of things you can kind of see through, and you see through to the core ideas when you know what the core ideas are. All right, let's continue.
Therefore, they are very important. Now, if we do not create a habit in time of distress, we shall not be able to think of abstruse subjects. We shall not be able to think of God or the Supreme Spirit. But when we are in good health and our minds are able to think, we should form the habit, and then in time of weakness, we shall fall into that habit automatically. When we pass away, we shall pass away with true thoughts in our mind. That is very important. Therefore, we should practice it. Nobody can tell when any accident might come to anybody. We would pass away suddenly while we're driving automobiles or moving in railway trains or doing something like that. Who can tell what will happen? So it is always necessary to be prepared for the last moment so that our minds would follow the right path. If we hold the idea that religion means to determine our future by good thoughts and deeds, then we shall observe them in a right way and make our future bright. The theologians of different religions do not give any answer to all our questions. They frighten us and say that it will be eternal damnation if we do not observe the prescribed doctrine and dogmas and so on.
Yeah, that reminds me of this is an old movie, so all you younger folks probably can't relate to this, but there's an old Disney film called Pollyanna, and in that film she's attending a sort of a fundamentalist Christian church service, and the minister storms up onto the podium and says, "Death comes unexpectedly," and everyone is shaking in their seats. Of course, he's going to talk about hellfire and brimstone, and but really, this is a much more positive message. Yes, death can come unexpectedly, but by keeping your habits of your thoughts in God, you're prepared for it. You don't have to be afraid of it. You've prepared yourself for it, and it's not something that you have to be fearful of. All right, let's continue.
But those sayings or ideas are childish. No rigid dogma or prescribed doctrine is necessary. There is a better sense and more rational idea which would be acceptable to most people in a different way. Just as I have been explaining now, just as we understand what Christos is, and what Word is, and what is their relation, and how the Word becomes flesh, the Word never becomes flesh. It is the projection of the thought of the cosmic mind. The perfect type of man has been manifested. Ordinary beings are far away from the perfect type. There must be someone who would approach closer than the rest. That way we can gather the spiritual meaning of these passages. Repetition of the mystic
Syllable. Yeah, skip the footnote.
syllable or mantra produces a mental vibration. Our brain cells will also begin to vibrate in that spiritual line of thought.
We might as well read this footnote. It was probably referred to something way up in the paragraph somewhere. These footnotes are so tiny. Oh, there it is, yeah. It's the footnote refers to the sentence about, and we might pass away suddenly from an accident or something. And it says in the Yoga Vasishtha Deva says, while instructing Ramachandra, O Rama, men should be religious in their temperament, even in their young age, because who knows when they will draw their last breath. Death may happen today, tomorrow, or any day. So that was the footnote. All right, so now we can continue with the text here.
Our brain cells will also begin to vibrate in that spiritual line of thought, and that is what we need. That would be just like good company. Good company is always very helpful. The association of ideas and the association with saintly characters help us in rising above all the weaknesses, defects, and imperfections, because all the saintly characters radiate goodness and spirituality, and in their presence we receive it.
Yes, that is important, and especially for people, young people in schools. There's such a pressure to fit in with a peer group and be accepted, and so you start taking on the ideas and thoughts of that peer group, and a lot of times those peer groups aren't the best influence, and so to pick your friends wisely and not feel pressured to be popular or be friends with everybody in the school is sometimes very difficult for people, especially people with a very extroverted personality. But for the sake of your own moral development and spiritual development, it's important to pick your friends wisely and not feel like you have to get into the normal crowd of whatever they're doing. And especially difficult when people go to college and then all of a sudden everyone's of drinking age and there's pressure, let's all go out and have something to drink, and then they get too drunk, and then the behavior gets even more strange, and so you end up doing things you would never have thought of doing on your own simply because of the peer pressure. So these things are really important concepts here. They're coming from very ancient teachings, but they're even more relevant now because we live in crowded situations. How many people live in little rural areas where you're just a few people around? You're going to huge institutions with thousands of other young people that you're going to be relating with. And so unless you have a real strong sense of self and a sense of your own values, it's very easy to get persuaded into other lines of thought. So keeping good company is really very important. And that certainly is one good advantage of some of the Christian churches that have active youth programs, and they keep you active with your own spiritual peer group and with Bible study and so forth. So that's one of the very positive aspects of those kinds of traditions. Okay.
Wherever they live, that place becomes like a temple, because they radiate that spiritual thought and the spiritual aura from their own personality. Therefore, in their company, the wicked ones become virtuous. They catch a little glimpse of the truth by remaining in their presence, just as if we put near the fire a piece of wet wood, the wetness will gradually dry out, and eventually that piece of wood will catch fire too. Therefore, one who is in bad company tries to associate with the saintly character may not like it at first, but if he continues in the course of time, he will absorb the spiritual ideals which are radiating from the saintly character, and eventually that person of wicked mind will become a saint. That is the process.
And of course this goes for people in the workplace too, because You might go to work for a company and thinking it's a great company, and then you find that the company's general idea is not so much of having service to the customers as it is finding ways to cut corners so that they can make more profit, and not being totally honest with customers and so forth and so on. And then it becomes the cultural habit of the company becomes a negative influence on you. And so, and that's a very difficult thing, to have to quit a job for something like that and go somewhere else, especially if you have a family to support. So it takes a lot of character for people to do that, to get out of situations that simply aren't conducive to a spiritual development. Now, let's see, there was something else I wanted to say. What was it? Oh, well, it may come back to me. Let's continue.
So when we do not find saintly characters to associate with, what shall we do? We should make an ideal by repeating these mystic words. We should create an atmosphere within us and around us. We should have a small corner in our own home where we can sit quiet and meditate and think these beautiful thoughts. And whenever we're in distress, we go and sit there. The vibrations will be changed, and we shall feel uplifted. Have such pictures and flowers and incense as would be all symbols of higher spiritual thoughts and would arouse spiritual feelings and divine ideals. Those are all helpful. In ancient times, men used to have little chapels like that in their homes. Even today in India, in all the Hindu homes, we shall find a little chapel like that. They do not go to a mass meeting like people here do. Temples are not like churches where sermons are given or anything like that. Temples are built by wealthy persons as a meritorious act of charity, where the poor people would go and receive alms. In connection with all temples, there are almshouses, where the poor people are fed in hundreds and every day. Charity is the most important thing in all religions, except in Christian Science. Because the Christian scientists do not believe in poverty. They rather deny it, and naturally they try to be rich. However, we shall notice that in all other religions, charity is regarded as the most virtuous deed. In the ancient religions, the idea was that every man would use a certain portion of his income towards charitable works. And that's a very good idea. That is, whatever our income is, we should use 1/10, for instance, for good and charitable works, and also for spiritual purposes. Sometimes, as I explained once before, when anyone passes away, in order to help him in the spirit world, friends and relatives who lived with him would perform good works in the name of the relative, or the departed friend with the idea that all the goodness or merit that will come from these good acts will go to him, and he will be helped. That is the best kind of prayer. We should pray for our departed friends and relatives, and our prayer helps them. That releases them from the earthbound conditions. That is to be understood.
Yeah, of course, the Latter-day Saint group is also very good at that, and they have, some of the lowest poverty and unemployment rates because they have quite an ethic of helping people to keep productive and active in the society. So churches can have a good influence on those kinds of things. And of course, they do tithe. They tithe the 10%. That's part of their tradition to do that. So, yeah, charity works is an excellent way to help other people, keep your mind uplifted, remember to be thankful for what you have and that you're able to give something to someone else. So it's not feeling like you're being a great person by doing it, but feeling grateful that you have the opportunity and the ability to help others. So charity done in that way can be very helpful to our spiritual practice. All right, let's take another paragraph.
People are beginning through spiritualism to become conscious of these truths. which have been practiced in India for ages. The Hindus had been civilized long before any other nation was, and had reached the highest climax of their spiritual realization in an age when other nations were groping in the darkness of material things. Therefore, they have given to the world wonderful ideas. Most of the ideas are becoming common now. This shows that people are progressing. They're beginning to understand the higher truths which were revealed in ancient India.
Yes, it's amazing when you look at how many ideas were originally coming from India and how they flowed through the trade routes largely, and also, as he says, through the Buddhist missionaries, and then later some of the Arab traders and the Muslims, some of the scientific ideas and so forth, all came in and were traded around. Of course, we know that things in mathematics came from India, the concept of the decimal system and algebra, the concept of a zero placeholder. All of those things came from India originally. And so not only spiritual ideas, but some really basic scientific and mathematical concepts and practical things in the world were also coming through from India. But of course, when we look at ancient archaeology and civilizations, we find more and more things being discovered that are very mysterious, and we're finding that we really don't have a great grasp on exactly how the human race developed and what areas. It seems like there were hints that there were things here long before what we thought they were originally, and where they came from and what influence they've had in later times and what happened to them and so forth is still a bit of a mystery, and you get all sorts of interesting theories, but we don't have enough evidence really to prove it. It's kind of like evolution. We have this idea of evolution, but we've got so many missing gaps, it's sometimes hard to know exactly what happened in those gaps. We can only kind of guess what happened in those gaps. So that's from the scientific method, that's the way things go. So let's see, back to our, spiritualism was very popular in those days, you know. Again, in the West, in the predominantly Christian communities, the literal interpretation of the Bible was beginning to erode. The people that were interested in science and were looking at things scientifically could see that from geology and archaeology and anthropology, all these new studies, that you couldn't take things in the Bible so literally. And so they were looking for a more tangible, experiential type of religion. And so many of them turned to spiritualism, which it was trying to communicate with the spirit world, in a sense, you could say. And they did all sorts of paranormal experiments. The Paranormal Society in England became quite popular, and I think then there was a spin-off in the United States too. And so they did many experiments trying to show various kinds of psychic phenomenon, which are very difficult to prove because some people have greater abilities than others. So it's very difficult to duplicate those things. And it's dealing with things that are difficult to pin down, let's put it that way. When you listen to psychics and so forth and people making predictions, frequently you can see that it would be very difficult for them to always accurately interpret symbolic messages that they're getting. And so they might be right, they might be wrong in their interpretation. So they're getting something, they're getting some sort of information, but how to interpret that information accurately becomes difficult. Also, I think I've probably mentioned this before, there was a TV show called The Psychic Challenge, where they had 16 psychics competing over different tasks, from very simple things like finding a room in an abandoned mental hospital, finding the one room where a person was sitting, or identifying which person they had 4 people in these little cubicles, and one of them was reading a book, and one of them had to have their hands in a box of cockroaches, and another one was listening to music, and so, and they had to find the one that had the unpleasant experience. Or finding somebody on a 10-acre desert plot hiding in the bushes somewhere, or trying to identify things in a crime scene. And they'd have various matching games, matching people up with their spouses, matching people up with their pets, matching people up with the musical instrument that they played. And one of them, I remember, there were 3 people sitting on horses, and they had to pick out which was the real cowboy. I think that one they all got wrong. I don't think one of them got it right. And 2 of them independently said that this one person had a drinking problem, and he swore him down he didn't have a drinking problem. So you just wonder, is this like a past life thing? Are they picking up, some energy from that person that's still there from a past life? There must have been something there that they both picked up on. So you can see how difficult it is for them to correctly interpret them. And then another test, they would just be right on, one after the other. Bang, 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 bang. Everything, they'd get all these things phenomenally correct. And then the next time it would just be kind of haywire, not very accurate. And so the spiritualist world is an interesting phenomenon, but it's very difficult to pin down and determine the accuracy of it. So that was an interesting phenomenon. The St. Petersburg Center was actually started by a spiritualist minister. There was a spiritualist minister, and his wife taught yoga, and they became very interested in Vedanta and disciples of Swami Atmavidyananda. And so they turned their spiritualist church into a Vedanta center, and when they died, they willed it over to the New York Center. So these things have ways of drawing people in. They realize that there's a realm beyond the physical, and sometimes that's what it takes. Just reading a scripture and wondering whether there's any truth in this ancient scripture or not, sometimes just doesn't do it for people. They need some sort of proof that there's some sort of existence after death, and that there's something other than this physical reality. And spiritualism does that for some people. They realize that this physical reality is not all there is. And so people can be led to higher truths. And of course, yoga practices, the hatha yoga practices also does that. People go in just because it's a good way of exercising and staying limber and staying healthy. And then they realize, these ancient teachings came from somewhere. They came from some other body of teachings where that's a part of a whole, and that whole included meditation practices and controlling the mind and the thoughts and so forth, and that this is just one little step in that. And so they become interested in that. So these things that may not seem like they're terribly relevant to religion actually are very often stepping stones for people. All right, let's continue. We have, I think, just enough time to finish up here.
It is said that a moment of good company or a moment of association with a saintly character makes a man cross the ocean of death. That's a beautiful idea. The association with the saintly character is like a boat, which saves the individual from all the material attachment and imperfections on the mundane plane. By crossing the ocean of death, we reach that shore where there is eternal sunlight, eternal wisdom, and perfect beauty of peace and tranquility. The soul's ideal is to reach omniscience, and how to gain that omniscience is the point. Each one will have to solve that. All these instructions are like suggestions that are given to you, and you take which appeals to you and practice it, and understand why you are practicing. Study your own mind and know the process by which you will be able to reach the highest goal. The Raja Yoga gives us different methods. Devotion to Ishvara, whose name is this mystical syllable Om, is one of the methods. The repetition of this sacred name and thinking of its meaning are the aids to concentration. These 3 letters that I have described, A, U, and M, not only include all thoughts in the waking state, but these include also thoughts that are in the dream state, and that are in the causal state, or dream deep sleep state. The A sound represents everything in the waking state. The U sound represents everything in the dream state. The dream state ideas are real. They are the occasions when all the thoughts become real for the time being. In dreamless sleep state, there are realizations which are included in the sound M. As in the individual, so in the cosmic sense. We can imagine that the waking state of all beings is taken collectively. That would be represented by the sound A. The minds that are dreaming, taken collectively, would be represented by the U sound, and the M sound will represent all that is to be realized in the dreamless sleep state. So these three sounds include everything. The more we think of the meaning, the higher we rise in meditation. And eventually we enter into the state of superconsciousness or God consciousness. That God consciousness is the state when we commune with the infinite spirit. The more we, where do I go?
Commune with the infinite? Yeah.
Commune with the infinite spirit, the higher we rise from the finite plane. And we become more and more infinite. We never lose our individuality, but our individuality becomes bigger. At present, we think of ourselves as limited within the narrow limitations of this physical body. But when we throw away this physical body and do not become conscious of this physical body, then we think of ourselves as expanded. It is the expansion of the self that is to be attained. And through that expansion, one would become closer to the infinite self. Then one would be able to realize that the same spirit, which is dwelling in the sun, the moon, and the stars, is dwelling within us. Or in other words, he is one with the spirit of the sun, the moon, the stars, the planets, and everything. He is not only one with the Supreme Spirit, Brahman, but is one with all manifestations in a spiritual sense. He is no longer limited by any personality. He has attained to that freedom, which is the ideal of all religions. Then he would be able to say, as Jesus said, I and my Father are one. Then in the ocean of oneness, he loses his individual entity. Then where do we go?
Yeah, that's it. Then in an ocean of oneness, he loses his individual entity.
Okay.
All right, so we just have 3 minutes left, so let's actually chant Om for the last 3 minutes before we close. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is it still the same. Om, peace, peace, peace.
Would you please tell me the author that